Hello, 10th graders, and welcome to the final lesson of this week. It's week 3, lesson 14. Hope you're ready for a good day of learning, and let's get started. Hope you didn't think I forgot the joke of the day. What did one plate say to the other plate? Dinner's on me. Get it? Because like dinner was literally on them, but also like I'll pay for it. Let's talk about what you are doing today. So first is you should watch the video you're watching right now, which is week 3, lesson 14. You're going to be looking at civil peace, which is the text you've been looking at all week. And you're going to write a character analysis for Jonathan, our main character, which we'll talk more about a little bit later. And then just a reminder, if you go down to lesson 14 itself, read the part that tells you what materials you need for the lesson and make sure you have those materials accessible when you start working on this lesson. The learning target today is exactly the same as what I just went over with you. I can write a short character analysis, and you're going to actually walk away with a really strong reflection of Jonathan as a character. Let's talk about the read, think, talk, write protocol for today. So for the reading section, you actually don't have to go back and read the text. All you really have to do is read the writing to sources assignment, which is on your note catcher, just so you can become familiar with it at the start of the lesson. You may, when you complete this assignment, have to go back into the text to read parts of it, but for the reading section alone, you don't have to read the text. For the think part, you're actually going to think about this question. What makes Jonathan do the things he does? What is he afraid of? What has he lost? You're basically going to tap into Jonathan's motivations and really consider like what drives him to do what he does. Now for the talk part today, you're going to talk with someone about what you think Jonathan's future might have looked like with these traits. So if he continued to live his life the way that he is living in this text, which we could assume he is, what do you think the rest of his life will look like? And then the big part of the lesson for today is the writing assignment. So you're actually going to write a brief character analysis, which is going to be the model for today. So I'll go over it with you. And the character analysis is going to be about Jonathan. And you're going to identify Jonathan's main character traits, including his strengths and weaknesses. And then you're going to explain how these traits help Jonathan overcome obstacles. So again, you really got to think about Jonathan as a character and his strengths and weaknesses in terms of his personality. No surprise here, you're going to close out by sharing your writing with someone and then reading a book for 20 minutes, which you'll put on the reading log. Also, no surprise is that I'm going to mention the note catcher. So remember that you have to complete the note catcher and you should read everything in the note catcher because it gives you some really important information that will help you complete the assignment. The model today is around the character analysis paragraph you have to write. I'm not going to model the writing itself for a few reasons. A, everyone writes differently and I don't want to impose my style on you. And B, I don't really want to give anything away. I want you all to find this information on your own. But I am going to support you on the brainstorming that will help you be prepared to write that character analysis paragraph. So it's important to look at either the lesson or the note catcher to remind yourself of what the actual prompt is, and I'll read it for you again. You have to identify Jonathan's main character traits, including his strengths and weaknesses. Then explain how these traits help Jonathan overcome obstacles. Now, in the note catcher, it also gives you some suggested steps before writing, which is like the brainstorm that we're going to talk about in a second. I wanted to quickly go over them because they're helpful to keep in mind when you're trying to think through all the information to pull together to write this character analysis paragraph. The first few bullet points are sort of linked. The first one says, review the story to analyze Jonathan in detail. And the second one says, identify specific examples in the story that demonstrate Jonathan's character traits. Now, although you didn't have to reread the text, again in the reading section, this is where it may come in handy to go back through the text. You don't have to read it from top to bottom because you've read it twice before, but you probably should skim it and look at the notes that you've taken along the way. Maybe even look at the summary that you completed, the close read annotations to go back and figure out more information about Jonathan as a character and start unpacking him in terms of his personality. The next one says, link supporting details to your main idea using phrases such as, for example, include transition words such as instead to connect ideas. This will come in the writing process itself, but remember, like when you're linking ideas or details, you should use transition words. And if you're even giving a detail that is in contrast or opposite of another detail, you should also use transition words to show that. And then another suggestion for writing itself, but you should think about this, when you're planning for writing, is end with a conclusion that completes the ideas you develop. So your paragraph should definitely end with a strong conclusion, a strong sentence or two that basically wraps up everything that you talked about in your paragraph. While the note catcher does have the suggested steps before writing, it doesn't have a brainstorming template or graphic organizer. And that's intentional because every person processes information differently. And so we don't want to impose one way of brainstorming on you all. But because I was completing this assignment myself, I did create my own template, my own brainstorming template that I found really helpful when collecting information about Jonathan as a character. And I'm going to walk you through my template and sort of give you some examples of things I found from the text and put it into my template. If you find it helpful, you can pause the video when I'm done explaining everything and feel free to copy the template down onto a separate piece of paper or type it up in a Word document, or maybe you'll be inspired to create your own template after seeing mine. All that is fine. It's totally up to you and how you process information. So here's the template that I created. It's for brainstorming. You'll see that I put both positive character traits and negative character traits at the top, and that's because that's what the prompt asks us to do. It asks us to look at both Jonathan's positive and negative traits. You're also going to see that both sides have examples 1 through 4, because I feel like having 4 strong examples of positive traits and negative traits will set you up for success with the character analysis paragraph. You're likely not going to include all examples in the paragraph because that would be longer than a paragraph. Probably could even be a whole essay if you had 4 examples of each. But it's always better to have more examples than less, just to be prepared. You're also going to see that both sides of the table have quote/paragraph number. After I identify the example, I'm then going to find a part of the text, a quote from the text, that reinforces that example, and also put the paragraph number next to it because it's important when you're writing a paragraph to reference the quote and the paragraph number for the reader to easily find it if they want to go back and refer to it. Now, the way I approach this is I basically, since I'm so familiar with the text already, I've read it a couple of times, I already know some examples of the positive character traits for Jonathan and examples of the negative character traits for Jonathan. So I listed those things out first, and then I went back into the text to find examples or quotes to reinforce that example. And you may want to do that too. You may feel like you already have a strong understanding of Jonathan as a character, and you know that there's quotes to support your beliefs, so you want to list out your ideas, your examples first, and then you're going to go back in the text and find quotes to support it. Or you may be someone who prefers the opposite, where you need to find your quotes first because you have a lot of thoughts in your brain, and you need to make sure that there are quotes that exist to support your thoughts. Either way is fine. I chose the former, not the latter, and I'm going to walk you through the former and not the latter. But again, it's totally up to you and how you process information. Okay, so the first example of a positive character trait for Jonathan was family first. I remember all throughout the text, Jonathan put his family before himself, but just really found family to be the most important thing in life, and he was so grateful that the majority of his family survived after the war. And so I went back into the text and I found a quote to support that. I just took a screenshot of it because I thought it'd be easier than having to type it all out. But I underlined the parts specifically that I think relate or reinforce this idea that he was a family first person. It says he had come out of the war with 5 inestimable blessings: his head, his wife Maria's head, and the heads of 3 out of their 4 children. So that reinforces that he's family first, because after this war, you could be really negative and sad, but clearly he was just so blessed and happy that his family, the majority of his family, survived. And I found that in paragraph 1, so I put paragraph 1 there to remind me. When you're writing your paragraph, when you finish the brainstorming and you want to reference this quote, you can say something like, in paragraph 1, Jonathan said, and then actually put this quote in quotation marks. That is just an easy way to make sure you remember to reference the paragraph. Now, an example of a negative character trait, you may disagree with me on this, and this is totally fine. And honestly, I was struggling to find a lot of negatives because I think he's a good person overall. But I sometimes thought that Jonathan rely too heavily on fate and on this belief that like nothing puzzles God. Like I'm all for religion. I think everyone should practice any religion they want and be very observant of that religion. But I also know that sometimes if you rely too much on fate, you may not plan accordingly, or you may get yourself into a situation that may be hard to get out of. So I found a quote to support that. I didn't underline anything because the whole quote supports it. It says, "To God who made me, if you come inside and find 100 pounds, take it and shoot me and shoot my wife and children. I swear to God, the only money I have in this life is the 20 pounds egg rasher they gave me today." So this is when the people are coming in, to his house, and they're trying to steal the money that they knew he just got from the Treasury Department, the egg rasher. And he is very, convincing that he doesn't have more than the 100. He definitely doesn't have 100 pounds. He doesn't have more than the 20 pounds egg rasher. And so he speaks a little bit freely and says, like, you can shoot me and my wife and my children if you come inside and find more than the 20 pounds egg rasher. So this is like an interesting technique, but I think he probably felt comfortable in saying that because he was like, if that happens, that happens. Like, I am a man of fate, and I don't think that they're gonna come into our house, but like I'm just gonna say it because if it happens, it happens. And so that to me was a little bit too risky because he was basically inviting them to come in, and had they taken him up on that offer, they could have potentially killed his family and him. So that's just an example of how I think maybe he relies a little bit too heavily on fate. And that was in paragraph 37. Now I'm only going to give you one more example of each because I want you to find two more on your own. So example 2 of a positive character trait is his resourcefulness. I find Jonathan to be incredibly resourceful. I think he makes a lot out of nothing, or a lot out of a little, I should say. And a quote to reinforce that, in paragraph 4, "He got a destitute carpenter with one old hammer, a blunt plane, and a few bent and rusty nails in his tool bag to turn this assortment of wood, paper, and metal into door and window shutters for 5 Nigerian shillings or 50 Biafran pounds." So he was lucky that most of his house was intact after the war, but there were some updates or some renovations he had to make to it because of the damage from the war. And he was able to basically, before anyone else had the smarts to go out there and try to find this material, he found all the stuff himself and was able to put his house back together and put it intact because he was resourceful, and he was able to use the resources around him to make the situation better. And then finally, the last example I'll share with you of a negative character trait is I find him to be sometimes a little bit over analytical and paranoid. And again, you may disagree with me on this one as well too, because it's just open to interpretation. But I sort of felt this way enough that I think it could go in the negative side of things. So it says here, "Jonathan soon transferred the money to his left hand and pocket so as to leave his right free for shaking hands should the need arise, though by fixing his gaze at such an elevation as to miss all approaching human faces, he made sure that the need did not arise until he got home." So this is paragraph 9, and it's when he is leaving the treasury and he knows that someone was recently robbed when they got their egg rasher. And so he is taking proper precautions, which I think is a really smart thing to do, just to be, mindful of your surroundings. But I almost feel like he overthought things, and that drew more attention to him. Like the fact that he thought through, like if he had to shake people's hands, to put up a certain image that everything was normal, and the fact that he didn't really want to make eye contact with people because he was so much in his head, and he was a little bit paranoid, a little bit overly analytical. It could be the reason why he actually looked more suspicious and eventually put a target on his back, and that's why all those people came to his house later to steal this money from him, the egg rasher. So while it's good to be prepared and mindful of like the worst case scenario, sometimes that could actually cause more harm for you than good. So these are just 4 examples I found, 2 for each, and I think it's a good start for you when thinking about how to complete the rest of this to find more examples to support your character analysis paragraph. So now it's your turn, and part of this is definitely to complete the brainstorming process before you write your character analysis paragraph. And like I said before, you can use my template if you wanted to pause the video and copy it down on a separate sheet of paper, or your own template, or you don't have to use a template at all. But I also want to encourage you to go in order of the lesson. So I modeled for you the writing portion of the lesson, but that comes later in the lesson. There are things that happen first. So I would stop with the brainstorming after this video and go back to your lesson itself and go in order, which the first part is to read the assignment in the writing section, which we did together. So I would say, unless you need more clarity on that, you can just jump to the next part, which is the think, and then the talk, and then you'll get to the write part, which is where you keep the brainstorming going, and then you actually write your character analysis paragraph. And then you're going to close out with sharing your writing with someone and reading a book for 20 minutes. And obviously, I know you know this, but there's a space for you to actually write your character analysis paragraph in the note catcher. So because today's lesson was the last lesson of week 3, next week we'll start week 4. And the first lesson of week 4 is lesson 15. The learning target is I can complete first read annotations to help with comprehension and future analysis of the text. You'll notice that pretty much every lesson that is the first lesson of a week has the same learning target, where it asks you to basically engage in a first read of a brand new text to help you with comprehension of the text. And the name of the text you're reading is listed right here. It's In La Rinconada, Peru, Searching for Beauty and Ugliness by Marie Arana. And in my opinion, it's a really, really good text I think you'll find to be incredibly interesting and engaging. And next week, you're going to have Miss Novak as your teacher, so I hope you really enjoy that time with her. As always, thank you so much for learning with me today. It was a pleasure. A few quick reminders. Number 1, don't forget to talk about your lesson with someone. Number 2, read 20 minutes and complete a reading log entry. The reading log is at the front of your packet, so make sure you go back to the front of your packet to find the reading log. And number 3, practice reading fluency using the first or second page of your weekly reading. So if you forgot everything about fluency, that's okay. Go back to the front of your packet. There's directions there, and you can use your weekly reading for the fluency work. As always, email your teacher if you need any support. You should know their email by now, but in case you don't, this is an example of how an email would look in the district. It's just the first name, last name, @DetroitK12.org. Hope everyone has a great day, and remember, keep learning.